Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar, Can You Overcome the Obstacles of Moving to the Cloud? I'm Bella with DynCloud, and today we'll provide insight on obstacles you may encounter when moving to the cloud and how to deal with those obstacles. Sharing their research findings today will be Michael Osterman. He is the Principal Analyst at Osterman Research, and Mark Gerke, the Cloud Solutions Specialist at DynCloud. They will be giving you a deep dive into the potential pitfalls and obstacles you may face as you migrate key systems and data repositories into the cloud. So please note that you are muted, and we'll have a Q&A sessions afterward. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box. So without any further ado, we'll jump into our main content. So Michael, please take it away with the overview.
Well, Bella, thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody who's here on the call with us today, and I'd like to thank our special speaker, Mark Gerke from DynCloud. We'll be talking basically about overcoming the obstacles of moving to the cloud. We're going to be going through quite a few issues here today. And let me just get this advanced here. So basically, we're going to focus on any potential security problems you might face as you migrate to the cloud. We've been tracking the cloud now for about 17 years as a company. And what's really interesting is that back then, when we were talking about hosted offerings of various kinds, email and other types of offerings, security came up as a very common issue. One of the big reasons people did not want to go with any sort of hosted solution but keep things on premises. 17 years later, we're still there. We see a lot of organizations that still mention security as one of the fundamental barriers to getting them into the cloud. So we'll be addressing some of those issues here today. We'll talk about how compliance is going to change as you move key data repositories to the cloud. Compliance is obviously a very critical issue for any organization, but particularly those that are in financial services, healthcare, life sciences, energy, a number of other industries. So we'll be addressing that as well. We'll ask, is the cloud more or less secure than on-premises solutions you might be replacing? That's a big issue because obviously organizations are concerned about things like data breaches and really a wide variety of security issues. And many organizations just don't feel really comfortable with going to the cloud. We'll be addressing some of those issues and, really understanding that the cloud can actually be more secure in some cases. We'll also be talking about IT potentially losing control in the cloud or maybe even gaining control. There might be situations where you can actually have more control over your environment if it's in the cloud than if you're managing things on premises. And finally, we'll talk about the types of cloud solutions that can potentially address these issues. So just a little bit about Osterman Research so you understand our perspective in all this. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus really is on anything related to the way that people communicate or collaborate in the workplace. So we focus on messaging, web technologies, collaboration technologies, and so forth. And then we look at all of the technologies around that, so archiving, encryption, security, content management, and so forth. We have a very strong emphasis on primary research. We have our own research panel. And we go to these people on a regular basis really to understand what's going on with issues related to the cloud, but really anything related to IT in the context of communication or collaboration. The company was founded in 2001, and we're based near Seattle. So, Mark, I'm going to let you provide this intro about DynCloud, and I'd like to introduce Mark Gerke to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time. My name is Mark Gerke. I'm with DynCloud. I'm a cloud solutions specialist, kind of a pre-sales technical architect. A little background on DynCloud. We're headquartered in Los Angeles. We incorporated in January 2011. It'll actually be 6 years in about 3 weeks. However, we did spin off from a billion-dollar VAR that had been in business for over 20 years. We have been working with the cloud and virtualization for many, many years prior to launching in January 2011. We've got about 100 employees, and we're a cloud services provider. The services that we offer, we went to market, when we first launched as a, DaaS provider, desktop as a service provider, hosted workspaces, commonly referred to as now, which is basically running your Windows workstations, in a high availability, high performance, data center, giving you anywhere, anytime access from any device to your Windows applications and data. We also offer infrastructure as a service or hosted servers. those are kind of our hosted services. Then as far as, there's for folks that kind of want to leave things where they're at and leverage the cloud for offsite backup and recovery, and we offer, backup and disaster recovery services as well as, wrapping our cloud services, with professional services for migrations and setup and, upgrades, et cetera, along with ongoing, professional managed services. We host exclusively out of, Tier 3 plus, Tier 4 data centers that have all the necessary security certifications as far as SSAE 16, our PCI DSS for credit card industry compliant, as well as HIPAA compliant for healthcare, as well as, SOX for, publicly traded companies, Graham-Leach Biley for financial organizations, pharma, et cetera. And we host exclusively out of Equinix. There's a photo of one of our data centers, which is in Chicago at Equinix Chi 3. So good. Thanks, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Looking forward to today's call.
Great. Mark, thank you so much. So why is the cloud so popular, and why is it so popular right now? Well, certainly we all know that IT resources are constrained. Just about every survey we do, asking IT decision makers and influencers about the problems they face, one of the key things that comes up is that there just is a lot on the plate for IT to do. They have a lot of things that they have to manage, whether they manage things in the cloud or on premises, and most infrastructure today is still managed on premises. And also the number of IT staff that's available is shrinking. Now, it's partly due to the fact that, there just aren't a lot of IT people out there that are available to fill available positions, but it's also because there's a real IT skill shortage. Any industry conference you go to, whether it's RSA or Interop or any of these conferences, you hear this over and over, that there's an IT skill shortage. And so there's not only just a lack of people to put into the right positions, there's a lack of people with the right skills to put into the right positions. And so a lot of organizations are moving to the cloud. They're seeing cloud for email or CRM or whatever the capability is a way to at least partially get around that IT shortage and the IT skill shortage. And cloud resources are widely available. There, just about every flavor of cloud services available, from email to CRM to ERP to, storage, file sync and share, you name it. There's a cloud resource available. They tend to be relatively inexpensive, and prices are going down simply because there's so much competition. The number of vendors is growing. There are a very large number of vendors, particularly if you get off into sort of a niche area like file sync and share. You're looking at upwards of 140 different vendors of those kinds of tools. And, there are obviously, wide differences in the services that they offer and the capabilities that they offer and so forth. But there are a lot of vendors out there. And, they come in a lot of flavors, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, PaaS, SaaS, lots of different capabilities are offered in the context of cloud. And so if you're an IT decision maker or a business decision maker and you want to look at a way to replace your on-premises infrastructure with something in the cloud, you can almost always find a number of vendors that are offering services that are relatively on point. Now, again, there's wide variability in terms of the capabilities, the quality of service offerings, and so forth, but there are a lot of cloud services available out there. And the cloud is growing. Every research project we've done and research projects that are being done by a number of firms demonstrate that email is rapidly growing and cloud is growing. So, for example, in 2016, our own research shows that today about 37% of business users in North America are served in the cloud. A lot of that is with Office 365, but also with IBM Verse, Google Apps, a lot of cloud offerings. In a couple of years, that's expected to be about 59% of business users. And again, most of that growth is in Office 365, but we're seeing this, not a wholesale shift to the cloud, but a very large percentage of business users are going to be served by some sort of a cloud-based email system. CRM, we're seeing similar trends. Last year, almost half of CRM systems were in the cloud, according to Gartner. According to Bessemer Venture Partners, by 2018, it's going to be almost 2/3 of CRM systems in the cloud. So significant growth there. Manufacturing and distribution software. Again, we're seeing significant growth from 2013, about 22% of manufacturing and distribution software was SaaS-based, about 45% in 10 years. So we're seeing, really in any software category that you look at that today is dominated by on-premises systems, we're seeing a significant shift to the cloud. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is going to go to the cloud, because it won't. There will continue to be a lot of on-premises systems, and there are some good reasons to keep certain things on-premises, but we do see in most software categories the majority of users being served by the cloud in some way. So how do you move your data to the cloud? Certainly moving lots of data, particularly if you've got very large archives, very large backups, multiple terabytes of data, can be a fairly daunting proposition to do that. You need to have the appropriate mechanisms in place to move all of that data. A lot of organizations today don't have that. And it's also particularly important to be able to maintain chain of custody for your content, especially the archives that you're managing. And Mark, did you want to jump in here? What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So what we're seeing is, you made a great point, depending on the size of data will kind of dictate, the migration method. If you've got, over 5-10 terabytes of data, typically what you're going to want to do is seed the cloud provider by providing that data on disk, standing the environment up, copying that data over, and then syncing any changes. That's typically how you're going to do a larger environment, and there's different ways to do that. There's automated tools that can, automate the process. You can use, typical copy methods. Customers can also, take their existing environment, whether it's a physical environment, and do what they call a physical to virtual migration. There's migration tools, and get it in a hypervisor format. Or if they've already got, virtualized environment in a hypervisor format, they can typically import, with those hypervisors. And again, depending on the size of the amount of data, it's either going to be done over the wire through an IPsec VPN tunnel to a secure site. Would be one way if you're talking, maybe 5 terabytes or less. And then for larger environments, it's typically going to be done by seeding the environment on disk. So great point, Michael. Thank you for that.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, and I really want to emphasize the issue of chain of custody. If you are maintaining archives, for example, and you need those for e-discovery, regulatory compliance, and you need to maintain really the authenticity of that data, that movement of data from, let's say, an on-premises archive to a cloud archive can be a very critical issue, because you cannot lose chain of custody, because if you do, that data is more or less worthless for any sort of compliance obligation you might have to satisfy in the future. So as Mark noted, you have to be very careful about how you do this and make sure that the migration is managed properly.
Michael, a follow-up to that point, typically what we do is we're having the customer encrypt the data on their end. They hold the key. So when it comes to, when they send it to us, the data's been encrypted. We can't make any changes to it. Nobody can make any changes to it. So when they go ahead and move the data, they'll unencrypt it with the key that they hold.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And that, that has to be, very well planned up front. So in terms of security considerations and moving to the cloud, it's important to note that everybody is a target. In an era of very common data breaches, hacking attempts, phishing, ransomware, you name it, everybody is a target, whether you're on premises or in the cloud. Now, cloud providers can be targets. Multi-tenant environments, potentially can be more susceptible to various things like system vulnerabilities, hacking, and so forth, because they do manage so much data for so many customers. And, centralized data repositories in some situations can be more vulnerable to deletion, DDoS attacks, and so forth. But it's important to note that if you're going with a leading cloud provider, generally they're going to have very robust security capabilities, typically more than you'd find on premises, largely because that's their business. And if they have a major security vulnerability, if a data center gets hacked and customer data gets deleted or altered or stolen in some way, that provider is, more or less out of business. So it's very important for those providers to have very good security, and the leading providers all do. They have very robust security that in most cases is going to be better than on premises, largely because they have the economies of scale to support very robust security infrastructures. And also cloud providers that protect multiple customers really are just highly motivated. They have to protect those customers because their business depends on it. One major data breach, one incursion somehow at a major data center from a cloud provider, and that cloud provider is going to suffer some very negative PR, if not completely go out of business. So the key here is really choosing the right provider that can demonstrate that they've already implemented a very robust security infrastructure that's going to be better in most cases than on premises. Mark, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. You make a great point. So you're going to want to look for a provider that has, security certifications like SSAE 16, et cetera. Is HIPAA, PCI, DSS compliant, and and does things like gives each customer total isolation with segmenting things at the VLAN level. Giving dedicated appliances, so you're not in a multi-tenant sharing, load balancers or firewalls or VPNs or those sorts of things. Then you also want to look at a provider that's going to add some additional layers of security, provide that perimeter security. You mentioned DDoS attacks. One of the things that we do is about, an interesting statistic, about 30 to 40% of the traffic on most providers' networks is bad traffic. So you want to look for somebody that's doing something at the perimeter to keep a lot of that bad traffic off. In our example, in our case, we're using some perimeter security to do that, as well as providing network security and robust DNS solutions so that you can be impervious to DDoS attacks that are becoming more prevalent. So again, great point, Michael. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So managing compliance in the cloud, it's one of the issues here is that not all content that an organization has to process might be captured properly, or maybe it can be deleted too early. We find that in a lot of cases, organizations are not appropriately managing their data. So if there is content that they need for compliance purposes, that they might need for e-discovery and so forth, a lot of that data is under the control of users, and it's not under the control of IT or compliance or some other department managed by the company itself. And so organizations might not be capturing data properly, or they can delete it too early, which is even worse in some cases, because now you had the data, now you don't have it anymore. Also, for a lot of organizations, data capture can be incomplete or even non-existent. So if there's content that you're going to need to preserve for long periods of time, and our research shows that most organizations have to preserve content for many years, for a variety of purposes, if that data capture is incomplete, or if it's not even being captured at all, that can create a lot of compliance problems. And so it's important that any on-premises solution, but certainly any cloud infrastructure, has the ability to capture all data appropriately and archive it for the appropriate lengths of time. Also, for some cloud providers, their existing compliance processes might not match those available. And so it's important to note that if you have specific compliance obligations today, you need to choose a cloud provider that is going to be able to support those, that's going to be able to match your compliance requirements moving forward, because you can't have that mismatch, particularly if you're in a heavily regulated industry. And also, cloud provider compliance processes need to be consistent. And periodically, you'll find a cloud provider that will change their compliance processes over time, and that can create problems for an organization that has to have consistent processes for very long periods of time. And also, their approaches to compliance need to be consistent over time as well, so that those match their customers, particularly in heavily regulated industries like financial services and healthcare. Now, a lot of the leading cloud providers do have very good compliance approaches. There are some out there that change things over time, particularly as they grow and modify their services. And so that is an important consideration in looking at the long-term roadmap of these cloud providers to make sure that they match what you're going to require. So is the cloud more secure, or is it less secure? Certainly, as I mentioned at the onset of this webinar, that a lot of decision makers are concerned. As you can see here, according to a Netscope survey, more than half of the respondents that they spoke with believe that use of the cloud will reduce the likelihood that sensitive or confidential information will be protected. So there's still that concern. Many, many years later, after the early days of hosting, lots of decision makers still have that real concern that they're going to be less secure in the cloud. And there have been a few cases where there have been major cloud problems. For example, in October of this year, DIN suffered a major distributed denial of service attack, and it caused loss of service for customers like Twitter, Reddit, Spotify, SoundCloud, a variety of other cloud-based services. February of last year, Slack's central user database was hacked, and 500,000 records were exposed. June of 2012, there was an Amazon data center that hosted Amazon Web Services that was knocked offline by a major storm. So, again, there have been situations where cloud providers have been less secure and have had problems. But if you look at on-premises, we've seen a lot more problems. If you look at a lot of the data breaches that have occurred over the past few years, most of those have occurred from on-premises systems, whether we're talking about Target or Sony or whoever. Those incursions actually affected on-premises systems primarily, not the cloud. Now, the cloud can suffer outages and various kinds of attacks, just like any on-premise system, but the leading cloud providers are pretty well equipped to handle those issues because they have redundancy, they have lots of good perimeter security. They can really minimize downtime and prevent data loss, in most cases, better than on-premises solutions. Mark, do you have any thoughts on this?
You're absolutely right, Mike. You make a great point. Security is the customer's number one objection. About 90% of our customers are in some sort of regulated industry, and once they, dig deep and look under the covers, understand everything we're doing around perimeter, network, host-based security, DDoS protection, DNS protection, etc. They realize that they're actually more secure in a cloud environment. It's actually a major driver for a lot of organizations moving to the cloud, at least with us, particularly with the desktops. If you want to secure data in the data center so that your endpoints can't save any data locally or they can't save anything to the USB port to protect privacy and confidential information, we can do that with our desktop as a service solution. So it's a big driver for compliance and security. So good point, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another issue is IT losing control in the cloud. And again, this goes back to the early days of hosting, where a lot of decision makers felt that if they went with a hosted solution, and today if you go with some sort of a cloud-based solution, you're going to lose control. IT is not going to be able to manage the environment effectively. But one of the fundamental questions you have to ask is, do you really have more control over your data, over your infrastructure, and so forth, if it's located 500 feet on the other side of the building or if it's located 500 miles away? And in some cases, no, you just don't have that control. The case of Nirvanix, for example, a few years ago, they shut down with relatively little notice, and most of their customers had just a few weeks to recover all of that data. Not all of them did. You have to ask, can you get your data back if it's with a cloud provider? And that's going to be a real issue if you have multiple terabytes of archived data, email, CRM data, whatever the case is. That's going to be a real issue for you. You need to be assured that your data is going to be destroyed, that it's going to be defensively deleted, and that you can verify the data that was supposed to have been destroyed actually was destroyed. And you also have to focus on where your data is going to be stored. There are organizations, particularly in the EU, that have issues about with the jurisdiction in which data is stored. There are requirements in the EU, for example, that you store data only in the EU. Some Canadian organizations want data stored only in Canada because of their concern, for example, about the Patriot Act and the U.S. government's ability to access data and so forth. So, IT having control is a very serious issue. Now, in a lot of cases, the cloud can actually provide IT with more control. Leading cloud providers, for example, offer a fairly wide range of capabilities that will emulate the on-premises controls that they have today. So you can store data where you need to. You can defensively delete it. You can make sure that you can get your data back very reliably. They allow you to recover your data very quickly, easily, and inexpensively. Now, that's not the case for all providers, but it is for the leading cloud providers because they have really focused on this as an issue, because this is really one of the major objections. If you look at the major objections to the cloud from a lot of decision makers, it's security and control. So the leading providers really have focused on security, but they've also focused on giving IT the control that they need to be able to manage their data appropriately. So there are some other issues here as well. For example, if things go wrong, and things will always go wrong in any IT infrastructure, whether it's on premises or in the cloud, how much finger pointing can you do? Who do you blame? Particularly if you use multiple cloud providers and you have interactions between them, maybe some incompatibilities and so forth. It's important to know who you can go to address the issues when things go awry. Also, what kinds of service level agreements are going to meet your needs? Now, the cloud has proven to be very reliable, particularly over about the past 18 months. We've seen major cloud providers suffer very few outages, certainly very few major outages. And so service level agreements are important, but maybe not as important as they were a few years ago, simply because the cloud is so reliable. For example, if you look at Office 365, over the past 18 months or so, they have had very good reliability, very little downtime in their system. You need to focus also on the laws of physics. Certainly if you have very intensive workloads, lots of user interaction, it may make sense to have a cloud provider that has a fairly close data center because you can't really get around the laws of physics. There are issues with latency introduced by distance between users and the data center. So it's important to choose a cloud provider that's going to provide the level of latency you can live with. Also, as we've discussed, how do you get your data back from a cloud provider if you really want to bring things back on premises, or maybe you want to move it to another cloud provider? That's a critical issue that you really need to understand up front. And then finally, what is your provider's roadmap? Sorry for the typo there. But you really need to focus on the provider's roadmap and see what they're going to do from a security perspective, from an IT control perspective, from a compliance perspective moving forward. What kinds of certifications do they have or will they have? So you really need to fully understand your provider's roadmap before you make that decision to go to the cloud. So just a quick summary here. You certainly need, in the cloud, you need to address security problems and have lots of layers of security to protect your data, to protect all of your information assets. And the cloud can actually help you to become more compliant. There are some very good cloud providers that have excellent compliance systems in place, and you can actually be more compliant by going to the cloud by choosing the right cloud provider. Also, the leading cloud providers generally have more resources, and they can make larger investments in security, compliance, control, and so forth than most companies can, especially if you're looking at mid-market companies of up to maybe 500 users. Generally, a cloud provider is going to have far more capabilities than those companies could ever afford. And finally, with the right cloud provider, a company can actually have more control simply because they're not dependent on a single IT resource, namely those limited IT staff or the limited investments they can make in security, compliance, control, and so forth. And also, they're going to have the expertise, particularly if you're looking at mid-market companies or smaller. Those cloud providers are going to have the expertise that you're going to need for security and compliance, more so than organizations probably could afford themselves. Okay, here's our contact information as well as that of DynCloud. And Bella, I'm going to hand things back to you so we can take some questions. Have any come in?
All right, great. Thanks, Michael. So now we'll proceed to the Q&A portion of this session. So please note that you are muted, and if you have any questions, you can proceed to type them in the chat box now. Okay, so I do see a couple of questions. So I'll just start off with how will compliance obligations change as key data repositories are migrated to the cloud?
Mark, you want to address that first?
Sorry, Bella, I didn't quite hear that. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. So how will compliance obligations change as key data repositories are migrated to the cloud?
So, I mean, compliance is constantly changing. So you got to hit, the same controls that you would need to use on premise, you need to, kind of use in the cloud. And as Michael mentioned, a lot of cloud providers, such as DynCloud, includes a lot of those layers of security controls, such as access controls, multi-factor authentication, encryption at rest, constant vulnerability scans, etc. So, good question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that, I was just going to put my 2 cents in too. I don't think the compliance obligations themselves are going to change because I think those are going to be dictated by government, the courts, and so forth. But I think it's important to note that, for most organizations, they're going to have to focus more on compliance as they go to the cloud or as they consider going to the cloud because that's going to be a bigger issue. It's going to be a higher profile issue for a lot of organizations.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael and Mark. So Next question I see is, how difficult is it to integrate my existing security and management tools and processes with the different cloud providers?
I can take that one. So, with DinCloud, we provide each customer an isolated environment. So whatever they can do on premise, they can do within our environment. Whether it's installing agents on, desktops or servers, or even hosting, physical appliances. We can, provide a hybrid colo approach as well. So I think it'd be important to, check with your provider and make sure you ask those questions on, can you colo your own equipment if you wanted to? Can you install your own management tools, etc. With us, that's not a problem.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's see. So will the cloud be more or less secure than the on-premise solutions you're replacing?
No, this is Mark. I would certainly argue that, with the right cloud provider, as Michael had pointed out, you're going to be much more secure than you can be on-prem, particularly if you don't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on security equipment and personnel, et cetera. Because of the economies of scale, cloud providers, are typically making larger investments than most individual organizations are in security and compliance.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think that, certainly, if you look at the way the cloud is managed, if you visit a leading provider's cloud data center, I think you'll be very impressed with the level of security and control infrastructure that's in place today. Especially if you're looking at mid-market companies, they generally just can't afford that level of investment. Whether it's video cameras in the parking lot or inside the building, multi-factor authentication to get into sensitive areas of the building, the logical security that's built in, the staffing, and so forth. Generally, cloud providers just, because they almost operate like a carrier, they can afford to do more than most individual companies can.
Perfect. So let's see. Just see another couple questions. So is it common for cloud providers to allow me to run my own security scans and penetration tests?
I can take that. Well, that would depend on the cloud provider. Most cloud providers will, allow you to run your own security scans, but as far as penetration tests, most of them would not allow you to do that, to be setting off all kinds of alarms. However, with DinCloud, since everybody gets a dedicated, isolated environment, customers actually do that. We have, a lot of healthcare and financial services companies, some of the largest financial services companies in the world that are paranoid about security, run constant vulnerability scans, constant penetration tests. So, yeah, with us, that's possible.
All right, thanks, Mark. So will IT lose control in the cloud, or can you actually gain more control?
Michael, you want to take that, or as far as DinCloud is concerned?
Yeah.
Sure, please go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say that, yeah, I think that the question is both yes and no. Again, there are lots of providers out there of various kinds of cloud services, and not all of them provide significant level of control for IT. So, for those providers, it's no. There are, some providers that don't give IT many controls over how data is managed, how it's protected, and so forth. For leading cloud providers, yes, they provide those IT controls because that's their fundamental business. That's why they're there, is to act as a replacement for on-premises solutions, and they know they're not going to be selected long-term if they don't provide that level of IT control that decision makers really need.
Michael, what I'm currently seeing is, some customers don't want any control. They want a fully managed solution, so we can do that as well. But, there's quite a few customers that want full control. They want root-level access to their machines. They want full control over networking, firewall rules, VPN capabilities, et cetera. So, with us, you can certainly get that level of control.
Okay. So I do see one last question. So last call for questions. Are there typically hidden fees to be aware of?
I can take that. So with a lot of cloud providers, most of the hidden fees are going to be around data transfer fees. So every time you move data in or take data out of the cloud, you're going to get hit with a transfer fee. So you don't have a predictable bill. It's hard to budget. You don't really know what your bill is going to be at the end of each month. However, with DynCloud and a few other providers, they include the bandwidth, and there are no transfer fees. So with us, that's a non-concern. There's no transfer fees with us.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So last call for questions. I'll just wait like a couple seconds, see if anyone has any last questions they want to input. So, okay, so it seems like we have no more questions in the chat box. So, all right, thank you, Michael and Mark, and great information covered today. So we do have a number of related resources available in this space. You can contact Osterman, Michael, or Osterman or Mark Gerke from DynCloud by phone or by email if you have any questions following the webinar, or you can visit our website for more information. So with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar and hope you have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions coming in. Okay, very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. That concludes the webinar, and we will have the replay available shortly, and we'll notify you of that. Again, thank you so much.